So I want to talk to you today about how to train your inner critic. And before we go on to talk about what an inner critic is and everything, I thought it would be important to say, well, let's talk about what the inner critic is, and actually why we have one, when you're most likely to hear it, because I think that's quite important for a lot of people. You know, some people don't realize that actually what they are hearing is their inner critic. And then I've got four, no surprises, practical ways you can take away and use to take control and take back a little bit of power that the inner critic might have over you. So what is the inner critic then? Well, the inner critic is described as lots of different things. You might not describe it or know it as your inner critic. I guess that's probably my phrase because that's what I use, term my inner critic. So some people might call it the chimp. You might have read The Chimp Paradox. It might be known as your inner voice, your self-talk, a monster, but overall it's that voice of self-doubt that you hear in your head that tells you you're not good enough. I think all of us experience an element of this self-doubt, but generally women are more likely to let it hold them back. Men do have it, but women are more likely to hear it and let it stop them from doing things. I think the people that experience it, most people, for some it's really prominent, and it can be around your professional lives, your career, maybe your business and how that's going, what you can and can't do. For others, it might be about your perceived competence as a wife, a girlfriend, a partner, etc., etc. You know, and how you are. For some, it might be about appearance, it might be about body image, it might be about your age. And there are some that experience it as their dreams, their hopes, their desires, the things that they want to do, but probably never get around to doing. I think that we're so used to hearing this almost background noise that a lot of the time we accept it. And that's the worst thing about it. We just accept that that's just how we are, and that's just kind of what happens to us. But I think the mere fact that we do just accept that really holds us back from doing stuff. And I think it's important for us to think about what might we miss out on while we're listening to that voice in our head. What are we not doing? And I think that this inner voice often holds us back because we're regularly able to then think we've talked ourselves out of doing something. And that's so easy to do. We all do that, don't we? And I think this has a negative impact on our confidence as well. So the good news is that whilst it's impacted to confidence and how you feel about things, actually you can't get rid of your inner critic, but the good news is you can train it, you can manage it. So let's look at the ways then that you might hear it. My screen won't work. So there's 6 ways that six common ways that you might hear it. The first one is this whole kind of harsh and rude thing. So your inner critic will say harsh things to you that you would never say out loud to a person that you love. And we've all heard the saying, haven't we, that, you know, if you wouldn't say it to a loved one, don't say it to yourself. Your inner critic will only see things in black and white. There are no grey areas. You'll either be awesome or you'll be absolutely pathetic. There's no in between. There's nothing up for discussion with your inner critic. It's also apparently the voice of reason. So, you know, your inner critic will appear to have your best interests at heart, but often, it might say things to you, oh, well, if you do this or that, what about your reputation? You'll ruin it. Or your work isn't ready for that kind of scrutiny. I wouldn't do that yet, which all sounds logical, but is it really? The next one is people in your life. So it's possible that the people in your life, your inner critic might draw inspiration from them. So it might be a teacher, it might be a partner. I was thinking earlier, actually, some of mine probably comes from my old dance teacher, who is now like about 155. I'm sure she is. She's still on the go. I don't think she's dancing, but and I can hear some of the things that she might have said to me. My favourite one, your inner critic loves to make statements and questions. So often it will say things to you like, you aren't. It'll start a statement with, you know, you aren't good enough, you aren't clever enough, you aren't thin enough, you aren't liked enough. And my favourite is what if. My inner critic loves to ask me what if. And the inner critic will always start with the negative first. So it'll always be, well, what if that doesn't work? What if nobody comes? What if nobody wants to work with me? What if nobody likes my social posts? All of those what ifs. What ifs was really prominent for me during the pandemic. You know, what if my business doesn't survive? What if nothing comes back like it was? And then finally, it can be, oh, I'm in the way, look, I can just move myself, I think. Finally, a bit like a broken record, It will just go on and on and on, repeating all of those things that you hear. It will just keep going on. Now, of course, you might not hear all of these. There might be one or two that are prominent, and like I said, mine is the what if. But the most important thing is that whatever your inner critic is telling you is not real. It's the I guess they're thoughts that present themselves, and you should not take actions on the thought of your inner critic. They're things that you've adopted over time, experiences. They're based on things that you kind of picked up, you've learned, so they're not real. So lots of theories then about the inner critic and where it comes from. Some say it is down to our past experiences or our culture, how we've been brought up, or even the lives that we lead now. But most commonly, we don't have to have a particular experience, because actually the inner critic, the brain, is hardwired for negative thinking. So generally, people give more attention to threats than opportunities. And we're more likely to remember negative experiences in more detail than positive ones. So it's interesting to hear Ali say in his pitch note, who's had a bad experience with somebody with their marketing. We're more likely to remember the bad than the good, often known as negative bias. And there was an interesting piece of research that said, for every one piece of negative thinking or comment that happens, the equal balance should be 5 pieces of positivity. Quite a challenge to do, but that is what it should be. But our brain's hardwiring evolved to keep us out of harm's way. So it developed systems that would make it unavoidable for us to not notice danger, because we lived in caves, right? And we needed to fight, we needed to eat. So it developed the fight or flight system, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. But the inner critic actually has our best interests at heart. It wants to protect us. And it's protecting us from this perceived risk. And that's quite important, the perceived bit. And this risk might be emotional, it might be hurt, it might be failure, it might be criticism. And yesterday I heard my inner critic, when Ronnie was speaking, Diane, I know I spoke to you at the end, my dad's got vascular dementia. And I've probably not been talking about it because I've got a bit of a fear of it, about what's going to happen. My inner critic was in there. She's got my best interests at heart, but it's emotional risk for me. But I guess part of it is, if I said to you, you know what, this perceived risk, oh, don't run for the bus because you might run over. You'll be like, oh, Gayle, don't worry about me. I'll be fine running down the road. She's gone a bit balmy. Or don't share your ideas. Why would I say that to you? But actually, if I said to you, don't go down that road because there's a lion at the end of that, or there's a snake or a clown or something that you really fear, it would be the snake thing for me. Then your brain's telling you it's likely to be dangerous. That perceived risk. In fact, I did have a snake jump out at me on a walk once, and I was just like, didn't calm down forever. But your inner critic will speak up more with more volume when you're likely to expose yourself to that real or perceived vulnerability. So I guess you could say, actually, your inner critic speaks up when actually you're doing something out of your comfort zone or something that you don't like. So you could argue it could be a good thing, not all the time. And that's probably a conversation for another time. So let me introduce you to Betty. Some of you might have heard me talk about Betty. So Betty is my inner critic. Now, Betty does have my best interest at heart. She can be very vocal and very loud, depending on what's going on. But for me, I call her Betty because A, it makes her not a part of me anymore. It makes her something and somebody different. But also Betty feels like a lovely old friend. No offense to any Bettys out there, by the way, if anybody's called Betty. But it makes me think that she's a lovely old friend, so I can't be mean to her, but I am able to say to her, Betty, I just need you to stop. You just need to stop and calm down, because do you know what? I've got this. There's actually a video on, I think if you go to my YouTube channel, there's a video on there explaining, I'll pop the link in, explaining a little bit more about Betty. But yeah, if you hear me talk about Betty, now you know why. And I know I was sat in here the other day and I could hear her going off, and I just said, oh, Gayle, just stop. I actually said Gayle rather than Betty, just stop. And Paul was upstairs, not here today, he was upstairs and said, you okay down there? And I was like, oh yeah, just having a little conversation with Betty. But I'm able now to say, just stop. It's not, it's not what you're saying is not real. So here's 4 ways then that you can manage or train your inner critic. The first thing to do is to acknowledge it's not real, okay? So self-doubt will always be there. It will always be a part of us. We'll all have it. But you can start to train that voice of your inner critic. Remember, it's not a reflection of reality. It's all myths, viewpoints that you've adopted. And I think by acknowledging that voice that's there, you can, let it do its thing without you needing to take any action or any direction from it. So recognize when it's happening, stop, take a breath, don't take any action on it until you've figured it out. The second one, you won't be surprised to hear me say this, is to name your inner critic. So once you've acknowledged it, give it a name. It can be really quite empowering to give it a name. It allows you to remove yourself from its grasp and distance yourself from it. And I think you can separate yourself by not using I. So instead of I can hear my inner critic asking me what if, you'd hear, Betty's there again saying what if. She was with me in the garden a lot during the pandemic. But it feels better. And also you're able to make a joke of it. So I know often, people will now quote back at me, oh, what did Betty think to that? And it just doesn't feel quite so personal. It's quite empowering. The third thing is true or false. This is quite important as well to think about, is it true or actually is it false? Can you figure it out? And if it's true, then great, go ahead, take some action with it. If it's false, screw it up, throw it away. You actually don't need it. And if you don't know, then what can you do to find out whether it's true or false? And then the final one is, I'm in the way again, look, is to turn down the volume. So use the good old mute button. A great way to kind of manage the inner critic. You can visualize this, you can picture yourself turning the actual volume button down, or get your phone, turn it on mute, use that mute button. If you find that quite challenging, do it visually, actually do the action of doing it. I think it's also important to say that sometimes, and I describe this as turning Betty into Beyonce. So sometimes Betty can be quite productive for me. And that might be when I'm doing something, I might hear her say, go on, Gayle, you've got this. But often I'm in a better headspace. And it might be when I'm out running, when you get there and you go, oh, you've only got this left to go, or you've only got that left to go. But you can often turn your inner critic into your inner mentor and use it in that way and think about, well, I worked with a client who loved Beyonce, and she had a thing of when she got into a negative space of saying, what would Beyonce do? And at one point she just kind of flicked her hair. Beyonce would like flick her hair and go off and do it. But if there's someone you admire, think about what that person would do in that situation. So I'm going to need to move myself again then. So remember then that you're not alone with your inner critic. Everybody does have a version of it. And the inner critic's only one voice in you. You can control it. It doesn't have to be the dominant voice. Generally, it does want to keep you safe and it has your best interests at heart. But often that means staying in your comfort zone. And we all know that, the best things happen when you step outside your comfort zone, you do something that challenges you to learn and grow. And you don't have to work to get rid of your Betty, whatever that your inner critic's called, or whatever name you're going to give your inner critic. Just recognize when it shows up that you can name it and you can train it and you can deal with it. And I think the final thing to say is what it says there is that remember, it's only you that gives all the power to your inner critic. So equally, it's you that can take away all the power from it too. And I think that's it. Oh, and there's a little QR code, but you're all connected with me anyway. So I nearly clicked leave there. And I was like, bye. Let me stop sharing. And then